The thunderous crack of gunfire shattered the morning stillness as Xander Walton dove behind a weathered water trough, clutching his bleeding arm and wondering how a simple cattle drive had turned into a desperate fight for survival. It was 1873 in the unforgiving territory of western Texas, and he was a long way from home with nothing but 3 bullets left in his revolver, and the thought of his hungry 5-year-old son waiting for him in Ardmore. Blood seeped through Xander's worn cotton shirt as he pressed his back against the rough wooden trough, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The cattle rustlers who had ambushed his small outfit had killed the other 2 drovers before Xander managed to escape with his life. The herd 20 head of cattle that represented his last chance at providing for his son was gone, stolen away in a cloud of dust and gun smoke. "Damn it all," he whispered, checking his wound. The bullet had only grazed him, but it stung like fire and had bled enough to weaken him. More concerning was the fact that he was now 30 miles from Ardmore with no horse, no supplies, and no prospects. Xander was 28 years old, though the harsh lines etched into his sun-weathered face and the silver threads beginning to appear in his dark hair made him look older. Life had not been kind since his wife Sarah had died in childbirth 3 years earlier, leaving him to raise their son Jesse alone. The drought that had plagued western Texas for 2 seasons had driven him to desperation, forcing him to invest everything he had in this cattle drive, a gamble that had just cost him dearly. He tore a strip from his bandana and bound his arm tightly, wincing at the pain. There was nothing for it now but to start walking and hope he could make it back to Ardmore before Jesse started to worry. The boy was staying with Mrs. Hemsworth, the kindly widow who ran the boarding house, but Xander had only paid for 3 days of care. He'd already been gone for 2. The merciless Texas sun beat down on Xander as he trudged across the barren landscape, his boots kicking up dust with each weary step. By midday, thirst clawed at his throat and hunger gnawed at his belly. He hadn't eaten since the previous evening, having saved his last jerky for breakfast this morning, a breakfast interrupted by flying bullets. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Xander spotted a plume of smoke rising from a small homestead nestled in a shallow valley. His instinct was to avoid it. Strangers weren't always welcoming to travel-worn cowboys with nothing to offer but his parched throat, and the knowledge that Jesse was waiting overrode his caution. The homestead was modest but well kept, a small cabin with a stone chimney, a barn that had seen better days, and a corral containing 2 horses. A vegetable garden, withered from the drought but still producing, lay to one side. As Xander approached, the door to the cabin swung open and a woman stepped out, a rifle held steady in her hands. "That's far enough, stranger," she called, her voice firm but not unkind. "State your business." Xander raised his hands slowly, mindful of his wounded arm. "Just passing through, madam. Had some trouble with rustlers back a ways, lost my horse and supplies. I was hoping for some water if you could spare it." The woman studied him carefully, taking in his bloodied sleeve, haggard appearance, and the honest fatigue in his eyes. She was tall and straight-backed, with honey-brown hair pulled into a practical bun. Her dress was simple but clean, and her eyes, a striking shade of green, were sharp with intelligence and caution. "You're wounded," she stated, lowering her rifle slightly. "Come in and I'll tend to that arm." "But leave your gun on the porch." Xander hesitated. A man's firearm was often his only protection in these parts, but the promise of water and perhaps a moment's rest was too tempting to refuse. He carefully placed his revolver on the edge of the porch and followed the woman inside. The cabin's interior was modest but neat. A cast-iron stove gave off a comforting warmth, and the smell of something savory simmering in a pot made Xander's empty stomach contract painfully. "Sit," the woman instructed, gesturing to a wooden chair near the table. She put her rifle aside but kept it within reach as she poured water from a pitcher into a cup and handed it to him. "Thank you, madam," Xander said, taking the cup gratefully. "The name's Xander Walton." Emma Bennett, she replied, gathering clean cloths and a small bottle of whiskey. Let me see that arm. Xander drank the water slowly, savoring each sip as Emma unwound his makeshift bandage. Her touch was gentle but confident, and he found himself studying her face as she worked. She was younger than he had initially thought, probably in her mid-20s, with a smattering of freckles across her nose and a small scar near her right temple. You're lucky, she said, cleaning the wound with whiskey. Xander hissed at the sting. Just a graze. Where were you headed before the rustlers hit? Ardmore, Xander replied, gritting his teeth against the pain. My son's waiting for me there. Emma's hands paused briefly. You have a son, Jesse, he's 5. A shadow crossed Xander's face. His mother died 3 years ago. It's just the two of us now. Emma nodded, her expression softening slightly. This drought's been hard on everyone, especially those with little ones to feed. She finished bandaging his arm and stepped back. I've got stew on the stove, not much meat in it, but it'll fill your belly. Xander shook his head. I couldn't impose, the water and doctoring are more than enough. Emma gave him a level look. When did you last eat? This morning. But then you'll eat, she said firmly, already ladling stew into a wooden bowl. I'm not in the habit of sending hungry men back onto the trail, especially not fathers with children waiting. The stew was simple, mostly vegetables with a few precious bits of rabbit meat, but to Xander, it tasted better than any fancy meal he'd ever had. He ate slowly, mindful of his manners despite his hunger, and told Emma about the cattle drive that had gone so terribly wrong. Those 20 head represented everything I had left, he admitted. I was counting on the sale to get us through the winter. Now. He trailed off, the weight of his situation settling heavily on his shoulders. Emma listened quietly, her green eyes thoughtful. When Xander had finished eating, she cleared away the bowl and surprised him by pulling out a small cloth-wrapped package. Take this, she said, placing it before him. It's the last of my cornbread and some dried apples, not much, but it'll help you get back to your boy. Xander stared at the package in disbelief. Madam Emma, I can't take your food, times are hard enough, and they're about to get harder for you and your son, she countered. I've got my garden, meager as it is, and I'm a fair shot with that rifle, I can manage. Xander noticed for the first time that there was no sign of anyone else living in the cabin. You're out here alone, a shadow passed over Emma's face. My father passed last winter, pneumonia. My brother rode east to find work in the spring. Said he'd send for me when he was settled, but... She shrugged, the gesture conveying both uncertainty and resilience. The realization that this woman was offering him what might be the last of her stores, that she was alone in this unforgiving land, just as he was struck Xander deeply. He reached across the table and gently covered her hand with his. Thank you, he said simply, his voice rough with emotion. I won't forget this kindness. Something flickered in Emma's eyes, a moment of connection, of shared understanding before she withdrew her hand and stood. It's getting dark. You'd best stay the night and start fresh in the morning. You can sleep in the barn. Xander wanted to refuse, to insist he could continue on, but exhaustion was settling into his bones. The thought of walking through the night, wounded and weary, was daunting. I'm grateful, he said. I'll be gone at first light. As he settled into the barn that night, on a bed of clean straw with a horse blanket for cover, Xander found his thoughts returning to Emma Bennett. There was something about her, a quiet strength, a generous spirit despite her own hardships, that touched him deeply. It had been a long time since he'd noticed such things about a woman. Since Sarah died, his world had narrowed to the daily struggle of providing for Jesse and keeping his own grief at bay. Sleep came fitfully, interrupted by dreams of cattle rustlers and Sarah's face fading into shadows. He woke before dawn to the sound of movement in the yard. Peering through a crack in the barn door, he saw Emma filling a bucket at the well, her movements brisk in the pre-dawn chill. Xander stepped out, his injured arm stiff but less painful. Morning, he called softly. Emma turned, a small smile touching her lips. You're up early. I was going to bring you coffee before you left. "Let me help with that," he said, nodding toward the heavy bucket. Together they carried water to the cabin, where Emma stoked the stove and set coffee to boil. As they waited, Xander gazed out the window at her struggling garden. "Your soil's too dry," he observed. "If you dug a small trench from the well, you could channel water more easily." Emma joined him at the window. "I've been meaning to, but between hunting and tending what crops I have, there hasn't been time." She hesitated. "My father always handled the heavy work." Xander made a decision then, one born of gratitude and something else he wasn't ready to name. "I could do it for you, before I leave." "You're injured," she protested. "And your son is waiting." "Jesse is safe with Mrs. Hemsworth until tomorrow," Xander said, though he knew his funds wouldn't stretch to another night's board. "It's the least I can do for the food and shelter." Emma studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, but we'll need to tend to your arm again after." They worked through the morning, Xander digging a narrow irrigation channel while Emma cleared stones and debris from the path. The work was hard but satisfying, and Xander found himself appreciating the way Emma tackled each task with determination, never complaining or hesitating to get her hands dirty. By midday, a rudimentary system was in place, allowing water to flow from the well to the garden with minimal waste. Xander sat back on his heels, wiping sweat from his brow as Emma tested the flow. "It's perfect," she said, genuine delight in her voice as water trickled toward her thirsty plants. "This will save me hours of hauling buckets." "Happy to help," Xander replied, surprised at how good it felt to see her smile. They shared a simple lunch of corn mush and the last strips of rabbit jerky. Afterwards, as Emma rebandaged his arm, Xander found himself reluctant to leave. It wasn't just gratitude that made him want to stay, it was the comfort of her company, the easy way they had worked together, the growing sense that he had found something unexpected in this lonely homestead. "I should be going," he said finally, standing and gathering the small package of food she had prepared. "Jesse will be wondering where I am." Emma nodded, a flicker of something disappointment crossing her face before she composed herself. "Of course, Ardmore's still a good day's walk from here." Xander hesitated at the door. "I don't suppose. That is, would you consider coming to Ardmore, for the winter at least? It might be safer than staying out here alone, and what would I do there?" Emma asked, though her tone held curiosity rather than rejection. "There's work sometimes. The hotel needs help, and with winter coming, folks will need mending and such." He paused. "And Jesse would benefit from a woman's influence. He hardly remembers his mother." Emma's eyes widened slightly. "Mr. Walton, are you asking me to help with your son?" Xander felt heat rise to his face. "I'm just suggesting Ardmore might offer more prospects than this isolated homestead. Especially with your brother gone and no word coming." Emma was silent for a moment, her gaze moving around the cabin that had been her home for her entire life. "I can't abandon my father's place," she said finally. "Not yet. Not until I'm sure my brother isn't coming back." Xander nodded, understanding her loyalty even as disappointment settled in his chest. "If you change your mind, ask for the Walton place on the east side of town. Anyone can point you to it." Emma walked him to the edge of her property, the small package of food now tucked into a cloth sack along with a water skin she had insisted he take. As they stood at the boundary, Xander found himself searching for words that would adequately express his gratitude and the unexpected connection he felt. "Thank you again," he said finally. "Not just for the food and shelter, but for the kindness. It's been rare these past years." Emma smiled, the expression transforming her serious face into something luminous. "You're welcome, Xander Walton. I hope you find a way to provide for your boy." On impulse, Xander took her hand and pressed it gently. "If you need anything at all, you send word to Ardmore. I won't forget what you've done." The journey back to Ardmore was long and grueling, but Xander's steps were lighter than they had been in months. The loss of the cattle still weighed heavily on him, but the memory of Emma Bennett's kindness and the surprising connection they had shared gave him a renewed sense of purpose. Somehow he would find a way to support Jesse, and perhaps, in time, repay Emma's generosity. Ardmore came into view late the next day, a dusty collection of wooden buildings straddling the main road through the county. It wasn't much a general store, a saloon, a small hotel, the sheriff's office, and a scattering of homes, but it was the closest thing to civilization for miles around, and it was where Jesse waited. Mrs. Hemsworth's boarding house stood at the edge of town, a two-story structure with a sagging porch and faded curtains in the windows. As Xander approached, the front door burst open and a small figure flew down the steps. "Pa," Jesse cried, hurling himself into Xander's arms. "You're back." "Did you sell the cows? Did you bring candy?" Xander lifted his son, ignoring the pain in his injured arm, and held him close. Jesse was small for his age, with Sarah's delicate features and Xander's dark hair and eyes. "No candy this time, partner," he said, setting the boy down. "We had some trouble with the cattle." Mrs. Hemsworth appeared on the porch, her plump face creased with concern. "Mr. Walton, we expected you yesterday. The boy was getting worried sick. Ran into some rustlers," Xander explained, guiding Jesse toward the house. "Lost the herd and my horse. Had to walk back." The widow's eyes widened. "Lord have mercy, you're lucky to be alive. Come in and sit down, you look dead on your feet." Inside the boarding house, Xander settled at the kitchen table while Mrs. Hemsworth fussed over his bandaged arm and Jesse chattered excitedly about his days at the boarding house. "Mrs. Hemsworth showed me how to make biscuits, Pa, and I helped feed the chickens, and Mr. Peterson let me hold his pocket watch." "Sounds like you had quite an adventure," Xander said, smiling despite the exhaustion and worry weighing on him. "The boy's been no trouble at all," Mrs. Hemsworth assured him, setting a cup of coffee before Xander. "But Mr. Walton, about the board." Xander tensed. "I know I'm a day late. The rustlers took everything, the cattle, my supplies. I don't have the money I promised you." Mrs. Hemsworth's kind face grew troubled. "I understand, but I run a business here. I've got 3 new boarders arriving tomorrow and I need the room." "I'll pay you as soon as I can," Xander promised. "Just give me a few days to find work." The widow hesitated, then sighed. "You can have until the end of the week, but after that I really will need the room." Relief washed over Xander. "Thank you, Mrs. Hemsworth. We'll be out of your hair by then, one way or another." That night, as Jesse slept soundly in the small bed they shared at the boarding house, Xander sat by the window and counted the coins in his pocket. $3.17, all that remained of his savings after paying for Jesse's care and the supplies for the cattle drive. It wouldn't last long, especially not if they had to find other lodgings. His thoughts drifted to Emma Bennett, alone in her cabin with her struggling garden and dwindling supplies. Had he been right to leave her there? Should he have insisted she come to town? The memory of her determined face and capable hands made him smile despite his troubles. She was stronger than she looked, that one. The next morning, Xander left Jesse with Mrs. Hemsworth and set out to find work. The livery stable had no need for help. The general store owner sympathized with Xander's plight, but had no positions available. The saloon offered him a job as a bouncer, but Xander declined, unwilling to spend his nights in such an environment when Jesse needed him at home. By midday, his options exhausted, Xander found himself standing outside Sheriff Hayes's office. The sheriff had always been fair with him, and Xander hoped he might know of work available in the area. "Walton," Hayes greeted him, looking up from his desk as Xander entered. "Heard about your trouble with the rustlers. Any idea who they were?" Xander shook his head. "They came out of nowhere at dawn, masked, professional by the way they handled the herd, killed Thompson and Riggs before I could even get to my gun." Hayes's weathered face grew grim. "That's the 3rd raid this month. Seems we've got organized rustlers working the county." He sighed and leaned back in his chair. "What can I do for you, Walton? I'm guessing you didn't come to file a report 3 days after the fact." "I need work," Xander said simply. "Anything." "I've got Jesse to feed, and Mrs. Hemsworth wanting her room back by the end of the week." The sheriff scratched his graying beard thoughtfully. Well now, the bank's looking for someone to ride guard on a shipment heading to Fort Worth next week. Pays good, but it's risky work, especially with rustlers about. I'll take it, Xander said immediately. Hold on, Hayes cautioned. There's also the Peterson place. Old man Peterson broke his leg last week, can't tend his cattle or fix that roof that's been leaking since spring. Wife's at her wit's end trying to manage. They could use a hand for a few weeks, and there's a cabin on their property you and the boy could use. Xander considered the options. The bank job would pay more, but would take him away from Jesse again. The Peterson place offered stability and a roof over their heads, at least temporarily. I'll talk to Mrs. Peterson, he decided. When does the bank shipment leave? Tuesday next week. That gives you a few days to settle things with the Petersons if that doesn't work out. Hayes stood and clapped Xander on the shoulder. You're a good man, Walton. Your boy's lucky to have you. The Peterson farm lay 3 miles outside of Ardmore, a modest spread with 50 head of cattle and fields that had once grown corn but now lay fallow due to the drought. Mrs. Peterson, a stout woman with iron-gray hair and a no-nonsense manner, welcomed Xander's offer of help with visible relief. Heavens, yes, she said, ushering him into the farmhouse where her husband sat with his splinted leg propped on a stool. Mr. Peterson's been fretting himself sick about the cattle and that roof. We can offer room and board in the old cabin and $3 a week. It's not much, but it's perfect, Xander interrupted, shaking Mr. Peterson's outstretched hand. My boy and I appreciate the opportunity. The cabin was small and dusty from disuse, but it was solid and dry, with a stone fireplace and 2 narrow beds. Xander spent the afternoon cleaning it while Jesse explored the farm under Mrs. Peterson's watchful eye. By evening, when they settled in for the night, it already felt more like home than their rented room in town had ever done. Pa, Jesse said sleepily as Xander tucked him in, are we going to stay here forever? Xander smoothed back his son's dark hair. Not forever, partner. Just until we can save enough for a place of our own. I like it here. Mrs. Peterson said I can help with the chickens tomorrow. That's good, Xander said, smiling at his son's enthusiasm. You get some sleep now, we've got a big day tomorrow. As Jesse drifted off, Xander sat on the edge of his own bed and thought again of Emma Bennett. He wondered how she was managing alone, whether her garden was thriving with the new irrigation system, whether she had given any thought to his suggestion that she come to town. The unexpected yearning to see her again caught him off guard. It had been so long since he'd felt such an attraction to a woman, not since Sarah had captured his heart over 10 years ago. The days fell into a comfortable routine. Xander rose at dawn to tend the Peterson cattle, repair fences, and work on the leaking roof. Jesse helped with small chores and spent hours with Mrs. Peterson, who seemed delighted to have a child about the place. The work was hard but satisfying, and for the first time in months, Xander felt he was providing adequately for his son. 2 weeks into their stay, as Xander was patching the barn roof, he spotted a figure approaching on horseback. Setting aside his tools, he climbed down to meet the visitor, surprised to recognize Sheriff Hayes. Sheriff, he greeted, wiping his hands on a rag. What brings you out this way? Hayes dismounted, his expression serious. Got some news I thought you'd want to hear, Walton. We caught those rustlers who hit your herd. Xander's pulse quickened. You did? How? They tried to rob the bank in Fort Worth, the same one your cattle money would have gone to. Hayes shook his head grimly. Got themselves killed in the attempt, but we found your brand on some of the cattle they were trying to sell. Not all 20 head, but 7 of them. Hope surged through Xander. The cattle are recovered. They're being held in Fort Worth. Bank manager recognized your brand from previous business and sent word. If you can get there to identify them, they're yours to claim. Xander's mind raced. Fort Worth was 3 days' hard ride away. He'd have to leave Jesse again, and the Petersons needed his help. But 7 head of cattle would make all the difference in the world to their future. I need to talk to the Petersons, he said. See if they can manage without me for a week or so. Hayes nodded. There's more. Emma Bennett rode into town yesterday looking for you. Xander's heart leapt at the name. Emma, is she all right? Seems fine. Said her brother finally sent word from back east. He's settled in Virginia and wants her to join him. She's staying at the hotel while she sells her homestead goods, but she was asking after you and the boy. A confusing mix of emotions washed over Xander: joy that Emma was in Ardmore, disappointment that she was planning to leave for Virginia, concern about what this meant. Thank you for telling me, he said, trying to keep his voice even. I'll ride into town tonight if the Petersons can spare me. Mr. Peterson, it turned out, was supportive of both Xander's need to claim his cattle and his desire to visit Emma in town. The cattle are rightfully yours, the older man insisted, and Miss Bennett sounds like a fine woman. You should go to her with my blessing. Mrs. Peterson agreed to keep an eye on Jesse, who was disappointed not to go to town, but excited by the prospect of helping more around the farm in his father's absence. You bring Miss Bennett out to visit, Mrs. Peterson suggested with a knowing smile. Any woman who'd offer her last meal to a stranger is someone worth knowing better. Xander rode into Ardmore that evening on Mr. Peterson's sturdy mare, his thoughts a jumble of practical concerns about the cattle and persistent images of Emma's face. The town was quiet as he approached, the saloon the only building still brightly lit. The small hotel at the end of the main street showed a few lamps burning in upstairs windows. Tying the horse to the hitching post outside the hotel, Xander hesitated. What would he say to Emma? How could he express his gratitude for her kindness and the unexpected connection he had felt? And how could he reconcile his growing feelings for her with the knowledge that she was planning to leave for Virginia? The hotel lobby was deserted except for the night clerk, who looked up from his newspaper as Xander entered. Help you, mister. I'm looking for Miss Emma Bennett. I believe she's staying here. The clerk nodded. Room 3 upstairs. She said she was expecting a visitor. Might be you. Xander's pulse quickened as he climbed the narrow staircase. At the door marked with a faded number 3, he paused and took a deep breath before knocking softly. The door opened almost immediately, as if Emma had been waiting just inside. She stood framed in the doorway, her honey-brown hair loose around her shoulders instead of in its practical bun, wearing a simple blue dress that brought out the green in her eyes. Xander, she said, a smile spreading across her face. I hoped you'd come. Sheriff Hayes told me you were in town, Xander said, suddenly conscious of his work-worn clothes and unshaven face. He said your brother sent for you. Emma stepped back, inviting him into the small room. Yes, finally. He's settled in Richmond and has work in a printing shop. He wants me to join him there. She gestured to a chair near the window. Please sit. Tell me how you and Jesse have been. Xander sat, watching as Emma poured 2 cups of tea from a pot on the small table. We're doing all right, working for the Petersons just outside of town. It's good, steady work, and Jesse loves the farm. He accepted the tea with a smile of thanks. And I just heard that some of my cattle have been recovered. I'll be riding to Fort Worth next week to claim them. That's wonderful news, Emma said, genuine warmth in her voice. I'm so pleased things are looking up for you both. Xander studied her face in the lamplight, noting the same quiet strength he had admired at her homestead, but also a new softness and openness that hadn't been there before. And you, when do you leave for Virginia? That's what I wanted to talk to you about, Emma said, setting down her cup. I've sold most of my father's things. The land was harder. No one wants a drought-stricken homestead these days, but a family from Kansas made an offer today. It's not much, but it's enough for the stage fare to Virginia and a little extra. When will you go? Xander asked, trying to keep the disappointment from his voice. The stage leaves next Wednesday. She hesitated, then continued in a rush. Before I go, I wanted to see you again. To make sure you and Jesse were all right, and to tell you. She faltered. Tell me what? Xander prompted gently. Emma's green eyes met his directly. That I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since you left my homestead. That meeting, you changed something in me. Reminded me that there's more to life than just surviving day to day. Xander's heart thundered in his chest. Emma, I know it's forward of me, she interrupted. And I know you're still grieving your wife. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know before I left. Xander reached across the table and took her hand, marveling at the mix of strength and softness in her fingers. I've thought of you every day, he admitted. When I'm mending fences or fixing that roof, I find myself wondering what you would think of my work. When Jesse asks about my journey home, I tell him about the kind woman who gave me her last meal. Emma's fingers tightened around his. It wasn't my last meal, she said softly, but it was freely given without regret. That makes it even more precious, Xander said. He took a deep breath. Emma, I know we've only just met and this might seem sudden, but I need to ask. Would you consider staying in Texas, in Ardmore? Surprise flickered across her face. Stay, but my brother, could you write to him? Explain that you found a reason to remain here. Xander leaned forward earnestly. I'm not asking for promises or commitments, just time for us to know each other better. Time to see if what I'm feeling, what I think we both might be feeling, could grow into something lasting. Emma was quiet for a long moment, her green eyes searching his face. What about Jesse? Have you considered what this would mean for him? Jesse would love you, Xander said with certainty. He already needs a woman's influence in his life. And the way you gave so generously when you had so little yourself, that's exactly the kind of heart I'd want for someone in his life. Emma's eyes glistened with unshed tears. You make it sound so simple. It's not simple, Xander acknowledged. Nothing worth having ever is. But Emma, when I met you, something changed for me too. For 3 years, I've been going through the motions, focused only on providing for Jesse, never looking beyond the next day. You reminded me that there's more, that there can be connection and understanding and maybe, in time, love again. A tear slipped down Emma's cheek. I'm afraid, she whispered. Afraid to hope for something I never thought I'd have. Xander gently brushed the tear away with his thumb. Then let's be afraid together, one day at a time. Emma's smile was like sunrise breaking through clouds. All right, she said softly. I'll write to my brother tomorrow, and I'd like to meet Jesse if that's all right. More than all right, Xander said, joy spreading through him like warmth. Mrs. Peterson already suggested I bring you out to the farm. She said any woman who'd offer her last meal to a stranger is someone worth knowing better. Emma laughed, the sound clear and bright in the quiet room. I think I'll like Mrs. Peterson. And she'll like you, Xander assured her. Everyone will. They talked late into the night, sharing stories of their lives, their hopes, their losses. Xander told her about Sarah, how they had met when he was just 19, how her death had nearly broken him, how Jesse had been his salvation. Emma spoke of her father's long illness, her brother's restless nature, her mother who had died when she was just 12, leaving Emma to become the woman of the house far too young. When Xander finally rose to leave, promising to return the next day to take her to meet Jesse, he felt lighter than he had in years. At the door, he took both her hands in his. Thank you, he said simply. Emma tilted her head questioningly. For what? For the meal you shared. For the kindness you showed a stranger, for being brave enough to come find me, for considering staying. In answer, Emma rose on her tiptoes and pressed a soft, brief kiss to his cheek. Thank you for giving me a reason to stay. The next morning, Xander returned to the Peterson farm earlier than expected, his face alight with a happiness that Mrs. Peterson noticed immediately. Well now, she said, hands on her hips as she watched him dismount. I take it you found your Miss Bennett. I did, Xander confirmed, unable to suppress his smile. And she's agreed to stay in Ardmore rather than go to Virginia. I'd like to bring her out to meet Jesse today, if that's all right. Mrs. Peterson beamed. Of course it is. I'll make sure we have a proper dinner ready. The boy will be thrilled. He's been asking for a mother figure for ages now. Xander's smile faltered slightly. I don't want to rush things or create expectations. Emma and I are just getting to know each other. Of course, Mrs. Peterson agreed, though her knowing smile remained. But a woman doesn't change her whole life plan for just anyone, Mr. Walton. You mark my words. Jesse was ecstatic when Xander told him they would have a visitor for dinner. Is she pretty? He asked, bouncing on his toes as he helped Xander clean the cabin. Does she like horses? Can she bake cookies like Mrs. Peterson? She's very pretty, Xander assured him, smiling at his son's enthusiasm. I don't know if she likes horses or bakes cookies, but I know she's kind and brave and strong, and she's very excited to meet you. Will she be my new mama? Jesse asked innocently, arranging his wooden soldiers on the shelf. Xander paused in his sweeping. Jesse, Miss Emma is a friend. We're getting to know each other. It's too soon to talk about her being anything more than a friend to both of us. Jesse nodded solemnly. But you like her, right? Like you liked Mama, the simple question struck Xander to the heart. Yes, he said quietly, I like her very much, but that doesn't mean it's okay, Pa, Jesse interrupted with the wisdom of childhood. Mama wouldn't mind, she'd want you to be happy. Xander gathered his son into a tight hug, marveling at the resilience and understanding in this small being who had lost so much yet remained so open to love. When they arrived at the hotel to collect Emma, Xander felt an unexpected nervousness. What if Jesse and Emma didn't get along? What if the connection he felt with her didn't translate to real life, to the day-to-day challenges of raising a child and making a life in this harsh land? But his fears dissipated the moment Jesse and Emma met. Emma knelt to the boy's level, her green eyes warm as she solemnly shook his small hand. I'm very pleased to meet you, Jesse Walton, she said. Your father has told me what a brave and helpful boy you are. Jesse studied her with the frank curiosity of childhood. Pa says you gave him food when he was hungry, and that you're brave and strong. Emma's eyes flicked up to Xander's, a pleased flush coloring her cheeks. Your father is too kind. I just did what anyone would do for someone in need. Not everyone, Jesse said with the certainty of a child who had seen hardship. Some people just keep walking. Something passed between Emma and Jesse, then an understanding, a recognition of shared experience that made Xander's throat tighten with emotion. Emma offered her hand to the boy, and without hesitation, Jesse took it. The day at the Peterson farm was filled with laughter and easy conversation. Emma helped Mrs. Peterson with dinner preparations, entertained Jesse with stories of her childhood on the homestead, and even assisted Xander with the remaining roof repairs, proving as capable with a hammer as she had been with a hoe in her garden. By the time they were seated around the Petersons' dining table for a simple but hearty meal of chicken stew and biscuits, it felt as if Emma had always been part of their circle. Even Mr. Peterson, usually taciturn, engaged her in a lengthy discussion about crop rotation and the best ways to preserve vegetables for winter. You know you're gardening, Miss Bennett, he said approvingly. Most young women these days don't bother learning such practical skills. My father taught me, Emma explained. He believed a person should know how to provide for themselves, regardless of circumstances. A wise man, Mrs. Peterson said, patting Emma's hand, and he raised a wise daughter. As twilight approached, Xander reluctantly prepared to take Emma back to town. Jesse begged for her to stay longer, and even Mrs. Peterson urged her to remain for the evening. We have plenty of room, the older woman insisted. No need to ride back to that stuffy hotel room. But Emma, mindful of propriety, gently declined. I need to finish some business in town tomorrow, she explained, but I'd be happy to return the day after if I'm welcome. You're always welcome, Jesse declared, throwing his arms around her waist in a spontaneous hug that brought tears to Emma's eyes. On the ride back to town, Emma sat behind Xander on the horse, her arms wrapped around his waist, her cheek resting against his back. The intimacy of the position was not lost on either of them. Jesse is wonderful, she said as they rode. You've done an amazing job raising him alone. He likes you, Xander replied, the simple statement carrying the weight of his son's approval, something he valued above all else. I like him too, Emma said softly. Very much. At the hotel, Xander walked Emma to her door, reluctant to say goodnight. "What business do you have in town tomorrow?" he asked, curious about her plans. Emma hesitated. "I need to withdraw my offer on the stage ticket to Virginia. And I should find lodgings something more permanent than the hotel. Mrs. Hemsworth mentioned she might have a room available at the boarding house." "The boarding house is comfortable enough," Xander acknowledged, "but it's not a home." He took a deep breath. "Emma, I know this is sudden, and I don't want to pressure you, but the Peterson cabin is larger than we need. There's a second bedroom that Jesse and I don't use. If you wanted, you could stay with us while you decide what you want to do next." Emma's eyes widened. "Xander, I couldn't possibly. What would people say? They'd say I'm a lucky man to have found someone willing to help care for my son," Xander said simply. "Mrs. Peterson would vouch for your character, and no one who knows you could doubt your intentions." "And your intentions?" Emma asked softly. Xander took her hands in his. "My intentions are honorable. I care for you, Emma, more than I thought possible after knowing you such a short time. I want you in our lives, mine and Jesse's, but I also understand if it's too soon, too fast." Emma was quiet for a long moment, considering. "What about Fort Worth, your cattle?" "I still need to go," Xander said. "Those cattle represent our future, but I'd go easier knowing you were with Jesse, that he was in good hands while I was away." "You trust me with him?" "After knowing me such a short time, I do," Xander said without hesitation. "You gave your last meal to a stranger. That tells me everything I need to know about your character." Emma's smile was radiant. "It wasn't my last meal," she reminded him, "but your point is taken. And yes, I'll stay at the cabin while you're gone. After that, we can decide what comes next." Xander's journey to Fort Worth took 4 days longer than anticipated. A sudden thunderstorm washed out bridges and turned roads to mud, forcing detours and delays. By the time he identified his cattle, arranged for their transport back to the Peterson farm, and started the journey home, nearly 2 weeks had passed. He rode the final stretch to Ardmore with his heart in his throat, wondering how Emma and Jesse had fared in his absence. Had she grown tired of caring for another woman's child? Had Jesse's initial enthusiasm for her waned? Had Emma reconsidered her decision to stay in Texas rather than join her brother in Virginia? The sun was setting as he approached the Peterson property, casting long shadows across the fields where cattle, including his newly recovered 7 head, grazed peacefully. Smoke rose from the chimney of the main farmhouse, and lamps glowed in the windows of the small cabin he shared with Jesse. As he approached, the cabin door flew open and Jesse burst out, shouting with joy. "Pa's back, Pa's home." Behind him came Emma, her face alight with relief and happiness. She wore a simple dress with an apron, her hair braided and pinned up in her practical style. But to Xander, she had never looked more beautiful. Jesse reached him first, and Xander swung down from his horse to catch his son in a tight embrace. "I missed you, partner," he murmured into the boy's hair. "Were you good for Miss Emma?" "The best," Emma confirmed, approaching more slowly, her green eyes never leaving Xander's face. "We were beginning to worry about you." Xander set Jesse down and stepped toward Emma, suddenly uncertain. 2 weeks was a long time. Things could have changed. "The storm delayed me," he explained. "I'm sorry if I caused you concern." "We're just glad you're home safe," Emma said softly. The word home hung between them, laden with meaning. Home wasn't just the cabin or Ardmore, it was here, with Jesse and Emma, wherever they might be together. Jesse tugged at Xander's hand. "Come see what we did, Pa. Miss Emma showed me how to plant a garden, and we fixed the leak in the roof all by ourselves, and we made a new chair for the table." Xander let himself be pulled toward the cabin, glancing back at Emma, who followed with a smile. Inside, the transformation was remarkable. The once sparse cabin now felt like a home. Curtains hung at the windows, a rag rug covered the floor, and wildflowers stood in a jar on the table. The rough furniture had been polished to a shine, and delicious smells wafted from the pot hanging over the fire. "You've been busy," Xander said, taking it all in with amazement. Emma can sew and cook and fix things, Jessie announced proudly. And she knows stories about Indians and cowboys and gold miners, and she doesn't mind when I ask questions, even lots of questions. Is that so? Xander asked, his eyes meeting Emma's over his son's head. She shrugged modestly. He's a curious boy, that's a good thing. As Jessie chattered about their activities during Xander's absence, Emma moved about the cabin, serving the stew she had prepared and slicing fresh bread that filled the small space with its homey aroma. The domestic scene stirred something deep in Xander's heart, a yearning for permanence, for family, for the kind of life he had thought lost to him forever after Sarah's death. Later, after Jessie had gone to bed, exhausted from excitement, Xander and Emma sat before the fire, their voices low to avoid waking the boy. "He's thrived with you here," Xander said, watching the firelight play across Emma's face. "I've never seen him so happy, so full of life." "He's a remarkable child," Emma replied, "smart and kind and so eager to learn. You've done well with him, Xander." "Not well enough," Xander admitted. "There's so much a boy needs that I can't provide alone, things a mother would teach him." Emma's hands stilled in her lap. "I've tried to give him what I can. You've given him more than I dared hope for." Xander leaned forward, his voice earnest. "Emma, these past 2 weeks must have shown you what life with us would be like, the challenges, the hardships, the limitations." "Yes," she agreed simply. "And?" Xander prompted, his heart in his throat. Emma met his gaze directly. "And I've never been happier, never felt more at home." Relief and joy surged through Xander. "Even though it's not Virginia, not the life your brother offered, my brother is happy in Virginia," Emma said. "But my heart is here now, with Jessie." She paused, her eyes never leaving his. "And with you." Xander moved to sit beside her, taking her hands in his. "I know it's soon, I know we're still learning each other, but Emma, I love you. I think I started loving you the moment you offered me food when you had so little yourself." Tears glistened in Emma's eyes. "I love you too," she whispered. "I never thought I'd find this a family, a purpose beyond mere survival. When you walked into my homestead that day, you brought life back into my world." Xander raised her hands to his lips, kissing them gently. "Marry me," he said, the words slipping out naturally, inevitably. "Be Jessie's mother, be my wife, build a life with us." Emma's smile was radiant through her tears. "Yes," she said simply, "yes to all of it." They were married 2 weeks later in Ardmore's small church. Sheriff Hayes gave Emma away, Mrs. Peterson wept joyfully throughout the ceremony, and Jessie stood proudly beside his father, beaming as the minister pronounced them husband and wife. The recovered cattle provided enough money for Xander to purchase a small parcel of land adjacent to the Peterson farm. Together, he and Emma built a home there larger than the cabin, with room for the family to grow. Emma's garden flourished under her careful tending, providing vegetables even during the persistent drought. Xander's small herd grew steadily, supplemented by the carpentry skills he developed under Mr. Peterson's tutelage. Jessie thrived with a mother's love in his life, excelling in the small school that opened in Ardmore the following year. Emma taught him the practical skills her father had taught her: gardening, preserving food, reading the weather, while Xander instructed him in riding, roping, and the care of livestock. The drought finally broke the spring after their marriage, and the land around Ardmore bloomed with renewed life. So too did their family, with the birth of twin boys, Samuel and James, followed 2 years later by a daughter they named Sarah, after Jessie's mother. On clear evenings, when the children were asleep and the work of the day was done, Xander and Emma would sit on the porch of their home, watching the stars emerge above the Texas plains. Sometimes they spoke of the future, their hopes for the children, plans for the farm, dreams of prosperity in the years to come. Sometimes they reminisced about their unlikely meeting, marveling at the chain of events that had brought them together. "I've been thinking," Xander said one such evening, his arm around Emma's shoulders as they watched a meteor streak across the sky. If those rustlers hadn't taken my cattle, if I hadn't been wounded and desperate, I never would have stopped at your homestead, never would have met you." Emma leaned her head against his shoulder. "And if I hadn't offered you that meal?" "If you hadn't offered me your heart," Xander corrected softly. "It wasn't much of a meal," Emma said with a smile. "Just the last of my cornbread and some dried apples." "It was everything," Xander insisted. "It was hope when I had none. It was kindness when the world had shown me only harshness. It was the beginning of us." Emma turned in his arms to face him, her green eyes reflecting the starlight. "And now look at us. 4 beautiful children, a home of our own, land that's finally producing." "And you," Xander said, brushing a strand of honey-brown hair from her face. "Always you, Emma, the greatest gift I never expected." "I love you, Xander Walton," Emma whispered, pressing her lips to his. "And I love you, Emma Walton," he replied, holding her close beneath the vast Texas sky. "Until the end of my days and beyond." Inside the house, their children slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge of their parents' love. Outside, the stars wheeled overhead, witness to the miracle of 2 lives transformed by a simple act of generosity, a last meal offered freely, a heart given in return, and the beautiful life that grew from that moment of connection on a drought-stricken Texas homestead in the fading days of the Wild West.